Hello, babes, and welcome to another episode of the Write Your Path podcast. My name is Lolly Spindler. I'm a writer, editor, book doula, and writing coach. And today I am recording from San Miguel de Allende, so I apologize if it's like a little echoey where I am. I'm not in my office. I'm actually like in a kitchen, so it might be a little echoey. I also apologize because I'm a little sick, so you might hear me being a little more nasally today. But the reason I now apparently travel with my microphone to record is because sometimes I just have like a bolt of inspiration and I have to get on here and record. This bolt of inspiration actually struck me a couple days ago, and I didn't have the time to record the episode in the moment, so I have like a long list of notes for y'all, so please bear with me as I go through this. But the general gist of this episode is the difference between Eastern and Western religions. And if you don't know this about me, I was a religion minor in college at Boston University, and I studied all Eastern religions, which was really funny because my sister was also a religion minor and she studied all Western religions, and yet she is the one with the tattoo of an Om on her arm. Anyways, fun fact about my sister, it's the only tattoo she has. So I always joke with her, I'm like, should I get the same one in the same spot just to piss off dad? But anyways, so here I am, the like yogi of the family, and she's the one with the Om tattoo. I just think it's hilarious. But yeah, so I studied Eastern religion. I focused on Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And of those three, I wrote my final paper on Islam, but Hinduism always had my heart. And that makes sense because today I'm like a practitioner of Bhakti yoga, and I did my 200-hour yoga teacher training, a 50-hour meditation formation, went to the Mahakumbha Mela, all this stuff. So, the signs were there from a young age that I was being called to this thing. And having grown up in the West, but having studied extensively the East, I really wanted to just talk about what I think is the main difference between the core of Western and Eastern religions and what that means for our societies and how they function. It's a big one. But the biggest difference I see between the two is Eastern religion emphasizes the fact that the divine, God, spirit, whatever you want to call it, is part of you. Whereas in the West, our religions say that it's something outside of ourselves, something to strive for, right? Something to aspire to. And I feel like this core difference between Western and Eastern religions and how they inform our societies really is the huge difference we see when we think about the East and the West, right? It's really this notion that in the West, God, the divine spirit, is not a part of ourselves. It's something external. And why is it designed like this in the West? So I'm going to use the term the system to refer to societal structures like patriarchy, capitalism, and organized religion, because these all benefit from one another and were created to fit perfectly within one another. And I'll explain why. These societal structures, patriarchy, capitalism, organized religion, in the West, they want us to be obedient, which is why they have posited God or the divine as something outside of ourselves. Why? Because it's easier to control a population that thinks they have no direct line to God, put in the most simple words possible. So they want us to not have agency. They want us to be submissive. They want us to be obedient. And that is why God is apart from us, something to strive for, something to aspire to be more like. They don't want us to realize that the divine already resides within each and every one of us. Because when we do understand that, when we do have that connection, foster, cultivate that connection with God, Spirit, the divine, guess what? That gives us agency. That gives us power. That leads to the realization that we can achieve anything we want, that we don't need these systems in order to survive, which is what we have been sold our entire lives, right? That's the scariest thing for those societal structures. Because when we have agency, we're no longer submissive, we're no longer obedient. We realize we can do whatever the fuck we want, that the possibilities of this reality are limitless. Honestly, it makes me think of the movie The Matrix, because that's really what it is. These structures were created to make us very obedient little creatures. What's really funny is even in college, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, I wrote a paper called Copulating for Capitalism, and how like the heterosexual couple is really the perfect working unit for the capitalistic system, because it's the smallest unit of people to create more worker bees for the system in which it needs more workers. And so that's why it's very against homosexuality, very against polyamory, very against any communal type of relationship bonding outside of the couple heterosexual pair bond, because it's not as efficient for the system. I wrote that paper like 20 years ago. Okay, maybe a little bit less than that. My 20-year high school reunion's coming up, so okay, like the 17 years ago, 16, I don't do math, but you know what I mean. So very much like the Matrix, once you realize these things, right? Once you realize we are sold heterosexual monogamy, we are sold God as something outside of ourselves that we have to tithe to get close to, that we have to attend church to get close to, that we have to do all these things that feed the system to get close to. Once you have this realization how all of these things are working together, it's literally like waking up like Neo in the Matrix in your little pod and looking around at all the other little pods around you and being like, fuck, right? So when we wake up like Neo, we realize we can bend this reality to our will. This is why I feel like a lot of people that I've interviewed on this podcast, and myself included, we kind of have taken the entrepreneurial path because we realize we can do whatever the fuck we want. Now, obviously, of course, there is privilege in having the opportunity to go the entrepreneurial route in the first place. But it's really this notion that if I'm Neo waking up in the Matrix and I realize the divine resides within me, I can then exercise my agency to do whatever I want. And most of the time within this capitalistic patriarchal society in which we live, that is expressed through entrepreneurship. So why don't more people understand this? Or why do more people not wake up in their pods like Neo in the Matrix? Because the system, this societal structure that has been carefully curated, it knows that in order to create, develop, and sustain that connection with the divine, it takes 1, effort, and 2, consistency. So, when we talk about effort, having the realization that we are not our minds, learning to quiet the mind and train the mind is one of the most difficult things we can do. So this, if you've ever taken a yoga class or a meditation class, you've probably heard of the monkey mind. It is human nature for our mind to jump around like a monkey, for our mind to wander, right? And I just went to a talk here in San Miguel de Allende yesterday, which is why I'm here with Sadviji. She's originally from California, but she spent the last 30 years at an ashram in India. And she was a scientist. I mean, I guess still is a scientist, but she was studying her doctorate in science in Stanford when she ended up at this ashram and never left. And so she loves scientific studies, just like I do. And she quoted this stat that 40% of the time, our mind is wandering. 47% of the time. Okay, like half of our lives, we cannot focus. And this is just getting worse, obviously, with technology. And so, given that, I mean, the monkey mind has been in the Vedic texts thousands of years ago. This is human nature. This is nothing new. It's only getting worse with innovation and technology. So, this structure has known for years that by human nature, we struggle to stay present, to focus. So it has this on its side, right? So the system, the structure knows. Quieting the mind, training the mind is one of the most difficult things we can do. Given that, even if someone makes an effort, right, to do this once or twice, to try to sit down and meditate and quiet the mind, they realize how hard it is and therefore don't stay consistent. So even if they, make the effort, they say no, and they don't stay consistent. And in the Hindu tradition, we call discipline tapas, right? So consistency, discipline is tapas. You have to be disciplined and have consistency, right? Because it requires both effort and consistency, not just one or the other. It requires tapas. You have to sit down, make the effort, but then do that every single day. Therefore, the system relies on the fact that the untrained mind will default to what's easier. Just think about it. What is easier, driving to church, sitting in a pew, and listening to someone talk? Or sitting in silence and stillness and training the mind to shut the fuck up? Option A. It's way easier. Also with option A, there's money involved a lot of the times. How many times have you gone to a church and there's a collection basket? Option B, there's no monetary exchange. This is just another level on top of this, right? It's not the main point, but just something to think about. The reason I stopped going to the church I used to go to, my dad's always been fairly evangelical Christian, and I used to go to a church called Seacoast Grace in California. And we would have to go before we did this program called Royal Family Kids Camp, where we volunteered with kids who were in foster care for a week. And so we were required to go to a church service the day that we left, so they could, the church could send us off. And I remember the last time I did this program, because afterwards we weren't allowed to, because I wasn't a Christian and I didn't go to this church. I just love children and working with them, and just those were some of the best, most informative, beautiful weeks of my life. But anyways, the last time I went, I was sitting there, and they're one of these evangelical Christian mega churches, right? And they have the band and all the instruments. And my boyfriend at the time was with me, and he is familiar with equipment because he's, worked in his friend's a director and whatnot. And he said, "Lolly, do you see that microphone right there?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "That boon is $3,000. I said, "What?" And I was like, "Nope, I'm sorry. How can you, you're not practicing what you preach. You're spending $3,000 on a microphone when that could be feeding how many children and families?" So this isn't it. I mean, the money thing is just another problem I have with a lot of organized Western religions. Obviously, people need to live and eat. And so, obviously, if you're learning from a guru or whatever, and like there's a monetary exchange, like you're paying for their time and their knowledge. But like these mega churches with $3,000 boons on their microphones, are you kidding me right now? I can't. And this is another total aside, but that's one reason I was really drawn to my Guruji in India, is because when I met him at the Mahakumbha Mela, there was like a group of 10 of us, more or less. And we go and sit down with him. And it's common in India, if you sit down with a Guruji, you give them like 20 rupees, which is like it's probably like $1 or less in US. And it's just, like, thank you for sitting with us, like, thank you for your time. It's just kind of like an offering, And so we all sit down and we do that. And he looks at us and he goes, no, 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 no. And he wags his finger at us. And he like holds his hand up so that we don't give him the money. And then he opens up the fanny pack that's in front of him. And he gives us all 500 rupees. That's a lot of money in India. So we were all giving 20 to him. He gave us all 500. And I was like, coming from right? A Western religious background, especially evangelical Christianity, where you're asked to donate a shit ton of money, especially if you go to one of these mega churches that have 3,000 fucking dollar boons, and they're always like passing around a collection basket, to having a man more connected to the divine, to God, than I have ever met before in my life say, no, that's not how this works. You take this money. That blew my mind. I was like, there's something here. So, money aside, although that's a big one for me personally, it's a lot easier, going back to what I was saying, to drive to church, sit in a pew, and listen to someone talk than to sit down every day by yourself in silence and train your mind. This is why organized religions are organized the way that they are. It wants you to defer to your lesser human nature. It wants you to not show up. It wants you to not put in the effort. It wants you to not have discipline or tapas. Because that way you wouldn't keep coming to church to look for God. You would already know God is within you. Like, it's easier to just have to physically show up and listen, right? Because then you also will never be able to access what I am intuiting they already know. So once you see the system for what it is, you realize how brilliant it is in its simplicity, right? It relies on simple human nature, on the monkey mind, on our laziness, on our lack of discipline, in order for us to stay small, to stay submissive, to stay obedient. But once you see that system and its simplicity, because, right, the best things are the most simple things. You look at art, right? Add by subtracting. You look at these brilliant technologies like Uber, right? It was just a taxi that you called from your phone. Always the best ideas, always the best systems are simple. This is the most simple system based on biological human nature. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? I'm not the first to see it. I won't be the last. But at the very least, I hope this will prompt you to open your eyes and start to see things for what they are. And look, I'm not against Christianity. I'm not against Catholicism. I'm not against Western religion. I think at its core, they're all saying the same thing. The God is the same, whether you call it Allah or Jesus. It's the same source that we're talking about here, right? That's not the problem. The problem is the layers of humanity on top of it. And by that, I mean the layers of human nature that have been added to this pure, beautiful connection to source in order to organize humans, in order to organize societies in a hierarchical way, in order to make more money. That's the part that we need to wake up to, that we need to be more critical of. Because the beauty of religion is they're all saying the same thing about connection to source and the divine. What I just wanted to make plain, even though if it wasn't very plain in this podcast, is just seeing the difference between how one type of religion posits, I don't want to say one type, because I mean Western religions vary a lot, but just to generalize, posit God as something outside of ourselves and how that functions to its benefit in a patriarchal capitalistic society. Because if it's all about hierarchy, right? At the root of these systems is hierarchy. For hierarchy to function, somebody has to be above someone else, right? And God has to, in this scenario I'm talking about, is at the top, right? And it's like, oh, we got to keep striving. We got to keep getting like, la, 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 la. When you realize the divine is within you, there's no longer a hierarchy. Everyone is the same. Everyone is connected to the same source. And that's why instead of a pyramid, it becomes a circle. And that's why if you're at all familiar with matriarchal societies, they're organized as circles, not as pyramids, because it's communal. It's not hierarchical. And that's the beauty of realizing, oh yeah, we're all the same. Like this differential, these things we say, like somebody has more power, somebody has more money, that doesn't matter because we're all at our core the same. And therefore, if we can kind of change that triangle into a circle and become more communal instead of more hierarchical, the system starts to operate in a different way. So this I know is a big topic, but I just wanted to try to explain how they're related. How hierarchical systems are very based on positing God as external, and circular communal systems are very much posited on God being internal. Just something to noodle on today. I can't wait to read your comments, and please message me directly if you want to talk about this more. I love talking about this shit, and especially like I said, like having studied this in a very textbook way of like sitting down and learning about it in university, right? To now like experiencing it with my heart and my body, like having these very different experiences of like religion from being a student to being a practitioner, right, to experiencing it are very different ways to come at it. And so I'm very curious to hear from y'all if you are religious or spiritual, or if you are a student of religion and spirituality, or a mixture of both. I would love to hear from you. So thank you so much for being here, and please like, follow, and subscribe. I will see y'all on the next one. Ciao.